So my name is Scott Millar. I'm from a company called SideSwap, where I'm one of the co-founders. I came here today to talk about how we can build a Bitcoin-based financial system using sidechains and specifically the Liquid network. Essentially, how we can scale Bitcoin and how we can integrate capital markets. So the key points I'd like to touch upon today are, number one, the ledger basics, the premise of how ledgers operate, the permissioning, etc., how the existing financial system works, and compare that to how Bitcoin works or blockchains work. To discuss delivery versus payment, which is basically the discharge of settlement obligations, which arise as when people trade or when they transfer or swap assets between each other. And finally, I'd like to wrap up with a bit of a discussion around how we can build a Bitcoin-based financial system using all these building blocks. So, if we begin with what is a financial institution? A financial institution at its core is nothing more than a ledger operator. They operate a ledger. That's all they do. They are the ones who control all the permissioning to the ledger, who has access, under what premise they have access, how account updates are made, etc., etc. These ledger operators operate within shall we say, a regional or local jurisdiction and need to abide by all of those rules as well. So it's not permissionless, nor is it open. And anyone who has claims against the ledger system needs to go through the ledger operator to effect any updates. Okay, so a financial system. What is a financial system? A financial system is just basically a collection of different ledgers or different ledger operators interacting with each other. Some of these ledgers are primary issuance layers. Other ledgers are exchanges where you trade, or clearing houses, or insurance companies, or bank. But in essence, all of these ledger operators make up the financial system and the interactions between them. And they're all based on the premise that the ledger operator controls everything within the system. So how do currency ledgers work? Or currency ledgers are probably more properly called the settlement of payments layer. They are done in central bank monies and within the national jurisdiction of the central bank. The structure of how central bank money works is that only financial institutions may hold accounts with the central bank. Well, there is cash circulating outside the system, but it's a very small part of the actual component. And if Bank 1 is meant to transfer cash to Bank 2, they always do so at the central bank ledger. So if we take just the euro system as an example, the only place that euros actually reside are on the central bank layer. The commercial banks are the ones who have accounts with the central banks. So anyone who has euros in their bank accounts, they don't actually have euros. They have euro representations on the ledger of the commercial bank. There are no euros in the commercial bank system. It's just pure representation. They are pegged euros or tethered euros or wrapped euros or however you want to call them. And any transfer which takes place between users within one ledger system can be done in real time, but if you transfer between two different ledgers, it needs to be affected at the central bank level. So if someone with one commercial bank transfers to another commercial, or a user who banks with another bank, it will need to take place at the central bank level. And what's important to note here is that all the settlement models that they have are what's called net deferred payment models, where all the transfers between banks are netted down during the day, and then during a few different time points of the day, they have these clearing cycles, at which point the central bank accounts are updated, and after that they can update the commercial bank accounts locally. So a very good way of looking at this is looking at the central bank money as the main chain. It's the primary issuance chain, and everyone else who has accounts here and actually shows representations of the central bank money in their ledger system, they are effectively a side chain to the main chain, which is the currency main chain. It's the same principle how securities ledgers work. So securities ledgers are held by central securities depositories, and this is where assets are issued. And assets are issued in the system and held mainly by the different financial institutions who hold accounts with the central securities depository. So very few people will hold actual personal accounts directly with the CSD. It can happen if you have assets which are not listed on exchanges, etc. But normally when you buy assets, you do so via a broker, and the assets will be held in the broker's name with the CSD. So the same model and premise here, where the central securities depository is the main chain, the actual issuance chain, and anyone else who has accounts there will show representations of the securities ledger. So what I'm trying to show here is that the current financial system is built on two concepts, with the primary issuance layers as well as all the ledgers below where you have representation of the assets. So what is a blockchain? It turns the permissioning upside down within the whole ledger system. It's a fantastic innovation where the absolute most crucial aspect is the fact that all of a sudden you have the user controlling account updates. The user controls the ledger, not the ledger operator. And the importance of this innovation is difficult to overstate, and obviously Bitcoin is the first such ledger. So if we are to build a financial system around the premise of ledgers where you have blockchain or user-operated ledgers, we need, one, a settlement of payments layer for such a system, and two, we need an asset issuance layer, or a CSD, if you will, that integrates with it and works together with the settlement of payments layer. So why Bitcoin? So Bitcoin will be the settlement of payments layer in any blockchain-based universe for many obvious reasons. It's very difficult to compete with Bitcoin on many levels. I would say there's no possibility of dislodging it as the settlement of payment layer, which is globally available. So what's missing in terms of building capital markets around blockchains as well as Bitcoins is an asset issuance layer which can be tied into it, which is where Liquid comes in. So Liquid has been purpose-built from the ground up to have multi-asset issuance, as well as the ability to have Bitcoin as the native currency, as a sidechain to the Bitcoin main chain. So this is basically what it would look like, where Bitcoin is the main chain, it's the settlement of payment layer, and Liquid being the sidechain to Bitcoin, where you have the pegged or wrapped or tethered Bitcoin within the chain, which is the native payment currency of the ledger, but it still retains all the properties of a blockchain ledger where the user controls the keys of them. Within Liquid, it's possible to issue any asset, non-permissioned. It's a free-for-all. There's no gatekeepers at all. But it's also possible to issue permissioned asset, which means we can issue securities. These securities would be issued in a 2-of-2 multi-sig, where the issuer controls one key. So the user would still be able to retain full control, create all the transactions, etc., and effect transfers directly between users so that the assets can be held in the user's name and transfer that way. Provided that the counterparty will be whitelisted, it's possible to effect the transfer. Okay, so with regards to financial markets, there's three main components of what financial markets do. One is price dissemination, making sure that everyone is aware of what a fair market value price is. The second is matchmaking, where they match counterparties to a trade. And lastly, they ensure delivery versus payment, which is the settlement of payment obligations and delivery obligations between the counterparties of the trade. So if we look at how the current system works, so the basic premise is there's two ledgers that we need to settle in, and both of these ledgers are, shall we say, account-operated ledgers by financial institutions. So clearing members post margin, which they have with a clearing house. They can trade all day within the exchange, and at the end of the day, they need to settle their delivery obligations or payment obligations. So at that point, they pay into the clearing house account, either with a CSD or with a bank. And once the clearing house controls both the asset as well as the payments, they can do the payout. It's very efficient within the context of how existing financial market works. With crypto markets, to resolve many of these conundrums which arise without the legal recourse which you have within the account-operated ledger environment, we need pre-funded models generally, which means that the exchange is basically a side chain to the different chains, or just a different ledger, which holds accounts on both the blockchain as well as the commercial bank, where users pre-deposit, they trade, and then they're able to withdraw. But if we imagine a model where we have one chain where we have both assets as well as the payment layer integrated into one, it becomes possible to have non-custodial swaps, which means that we don't need to rely on the third-party intermediary, because the whole premise of these ledger-operated or account-operated ledgers is that you need to go through them to effect any form of settlement. So with a liquid network, or actually any network that has multi-asset issuance where one asset is the payment layer, it becomes possible to create swap markets where users can effectively create their own inputs and outputs, post these in a public order book, and where any other user can come in and add their own inputs and outputs, and they both sign the swap, and the settlement takes place peer-to-peer without any custody. It can be done directly from hardware wallets as well soon. So it also means that anyone who wants to list or have their assets issued on a blockchain is able to create secondary markets for them without having to go through an exchange, etc., paying expensive listing fees. So if there's one aspect I'd like to point out is that anyone here who has a Bitcoin company or manages a registry or is looking to raise capital, do consider managing the registry and looking at different asset issuance chains which are blockchain-based, instead of going through the existing financial system, so that we can build capital markets which are connected to Bitcoin. So if we look at Liquid specifically, how far have we come? I think there's 6 or 7 securities issuances so far, which is not a lot, but it's a nascent market, it's developing. So one is the Infinite Fleet security token. The other is the Blockstream mining notes. Thirdly, Sideswap, we ourselves, as a proof of concept, we issued our own equity on the Liquid network, so it's tradable there. There's a fund called Aquarius Fund. The unit tokens of that is tradable also on the Liquid network. So it's growing, and there's a couple of more issuance coming up this year. So registration agents, they're the people who tie the securities accounts or whitelist accounts so that you can KYC and whitelist, etc., where they're tied into each other. So there's currently 3 providers or registration agents on Liquid. So that's Stoker, Digital, and PegX. So if you need any help or have any considerations, please do feel free to reach out and ask them. Lastly, the different exchanges are Bitfinex, Merge, which is the Seychelles exchange, as well as Sideswap, which is the open swap market. The first 2 are custodial. So lastly, I'd like to ask you all to learn more about sidechains, how we can build Bitcoin-based capital markets if we also apply the, shall we say, the premise of user-controlled blockchains to securities markets. Dip your toes. If you, I wasn't out here looking, but I understood that there's only about a few people who had tried Liquid. Please do try Liquid. It's very much like Bitcoin, but also has the securities aspect and swaps. So it's very interesting to try and learn about. And lastly, if you are inclined to do so, please do try issuing an asset, or if you have a company I'd like to tokenize or raise capital, please do move ahead and reach out to anyone within the space, and we'll all be happy to help you get onto Liquid. And with that, I think my time here is up. Thank you very much, everyone.